of strategies about overcoming imposter syndrome. So we'll just go on in the pretense that someone has it. They want to kind of overcome it. So I got a couple of things to points to talk about. Cognitive reframing techniques to overcome a feeling of inadequacy. What would be some of those techniques, you think?
Cognitive reframing. Well, that all I talk about reframing sometimes when I have clients and what it means and how impactful it could be. So that cognitive part, just thinking about how you can shift your thought process to influence your actions, right? So that is impactful because if I think I'm going to fail, a lot of people say manifest, a lot of people say claim it, or what, all those things. But if I think I'm going to fail, most likely I'm going to fail, right? Especially the strength of that feeling really influences that because sometimes you think you're going to fail and you do well. You're like, oh gosh, I did great. But if you consistently think that and have that in your thought process, it's a really good chance that it's not going to be exactly what you want it to be or turn out as well as you want it to. So that reframing is what I can reframe and think, okay, how can I look at this differently
Mhm.
so that it's more positive? How can I look at this differently so the outcome that I desire is exactly what I get?
Mhm.
And so when you go into like imposter syndrome, for example, and if I'm fearing, um, and I'll share this story just to put
Okay.
it into context. And so prior to becoming a senior vice president where I work now, I was a vice president group director, which is right after there was two level of VPs. I went through those and I was thinking, usually I work toward being in a certain role in order to advance to it.
Okay.
Right. So I had all these thoughts around, I know this is next, but am I ready for this? Do I really want to do this?
Right.
And it had a lot to do with
Uh-huh.
all the things that typically came with the SVP, working all the time, 60 hours a week, all these things. And I almost did a little self-sabotage because I was asking my manager, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. I don't all the things that would take me out of my life balance.
Okay.
But I wanted the job and I knew I could do the job because I was kind of already doing the job. But
Mhm.
all these things came to just like tapping me on my shoulders, like, okay, let me reframe this. I've been able to shape a lot of things that I do in my career and very thankfully from where I work now. So what's to stop me from shaping it
Mhm.
again or reshaping it and thinking of it differently so I can create what's well for me and the organization, of course, and move forward. So, no way am I going to say no to this opportunity, but how do I go into this knowing that I deserve it? One, which was easy, like you said, that's a fleeting thought when you get deeper into your career.
Mhm.
But then how do I thrive here too and impact the people around me where it's a positive experience for them? So just reframing it, saying what I could think of all the negative stuff in the world, but how do I shift that to be positive and to get to the desired outcome that
Got
I want without it over indexing in control or stifling me in fear?
Gotcha. Let's talk about some strategies to overcome it.
Yeah.
One, we just kind of reframed and thought,
Mm-hmm.
say, how can I reframe this? I've done it before with the other positions I had. I reframed and
Yeah.
it worked. So I just need
Mm-hmm.
to work through finding some techniques to reframe of how I would do this next step in my career.
Mm-hmm.
The role of, I'm going to say mentorship, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm also going to say coaching,
Okay.
okay? Peer support
Mm-hmm.
and in helping leaders combat
Mm-hmm.
imposter syndrome. So what
Okay.
is the role of mentorship, coaching, and peer support in combating imposter syndrome?
Well, I think with mentorship and just making, and I know you know this, but making the distinction between the mentor and the coach, the
Mhm.
mentor, I've been through this. Let me tell you what you can do. Here are my suggestions, all those things. And that's extremely helpful because if someone has been in a similar position,
Mhm.
they can say, okay, this is how I conquered it, but make it your own, right? Still
Right.
make it your own, but this is how I experienced it. With coaching, it's just like digging into what's going on, how is it showing up, how have you dealt with it in the past, and if you haven't, and how is this new, and tell me some things that if you were to tell someone else to or help someone else do this, what would you say,
Mhm.
and how can you apply that to you, so that coach really trying to get your thoughts out and for you to realize that you're perfectly capable of coming up with the answer and shifting your behavior around something by your own thoughts.
Okay.
And then peer connection, I would say again, much like the mentor, have you done this? Or we're going through this together. I'm not alone.
Mhm.
Or what are you experiencing? And how can I help you? And how can you help me creating that reciprocity between someone who could potentially be feeling and dealing with the same things that you are? So those are some great strategies or resources, I should say, to tap into for imposter syndrome. And I'll go back to, a couple of things I said before with reflection, because
Right.
sometimes that doubt comes in because we are not bringing in the information in our head that we got this, we've done this, we have knowledge, we have skill, we have ability. So reflecting is so important. And then I think also clarity, if you don't know quite what you're getting ready to get into, find out some more information, ask the people around you, especially if it's a task or project or a decision as a leader that you need to make.
Mhm.
Going back to that, analyzing and thinking about what else can I find out to help me feel more secure in what I'm about to do.
Mhm.
And I think the psychological or cultural conditioning too, thinking about that, but what's happening right now to me? Why is this showing up? And how can I address it? How is it showing up in my head physiologically? And then, why is it happening? Was it the toxic environment I was in before? Was
Mhm.
it being shut down? Was it failure that I've experienced recently that was totally unrelated?
Mhm.
So this is why it's happening. How can I address those things
Mhm.
that will help me come up with a plan to move past this imposter syndrome and into a space, even though there's fear, I'm still moving forward into a space where I can continue to contribute and do well in my role,
Mhm. Okay.
especially as a leader.
Yeah. I was just had a thought.
Mhm,
I When do you think, Nicole, this term,
mhm.
imposter syndrome, really kind of bubbled up and came to life? It's not something that is just happened. It's not a new
Right.
phenomenon. It's not a new
Mm-mm,
phenomenon.
mm-mm.
So
No.
I was just thinking about, I'm sure leaders over the years at some point had imposter syndrome or may have had imposter syndrome. I won't say they,
Mhm.
but may have had imposter syndrome. But why do you feel now that it's so publicly acknowledged, the
Mm.
struggles of imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with mental health, right?
Okay.
And those are my thoughts anyway, and how mental health has become like a, a topic that is very much needed, I'll
Mhm.
say,
Oh, yeah.
and being acknowledged, and also things being put in place to actually help with mental health. And it's so broad, mental health, that term itself, it can mean a lot of things. But in a general sense of people dealing with what their experiences are from a mental health perspective. So with imposter syndrome, anxiety comes in. So
Yeah.
anxiety is directly connected to mental health. And depending on how well you're managing imposter syndrome, it can really feed into an already existing anxiety disorder or experience that someone is having. And that tapping into all the other pressures of the world
Mhm.
overall, but then you might have some personal pressures or things going on. So I think that's why this term, I think I've heard it as long as I've been in my career, like
Mhm.
over 20 years. It didn't have a name at one point, but then
Right.
it had a name, and then sometimes it was suppressed because we're like, no,
Yeah,
people, leaders, they
right.
don't experience that.
They
They're
don't
getting
have
it
that.
done.
Right.
They don't
Right.
have it.
Exactly.
They're
Hmm.
completely confident in it,
Right.
which wasn't true, probably.
Right.
But then it become more prevalent, and then post COVID, with the conversations about mental health, I think it's become even more popular in a sense to talk about or to acknowledge that we experience it
Hmm. Hmm.
sometimes in our careers, throughout our careers.
Right. I had there was a CEO I worked with one time, and I won't say that she had imposter syndrome, but she was there was she I told her it was kind of an unusual situation, but she had to leave town on a business trip kind of unexpectedly. And she wanted to know if I could find someone for her daughters needed to go to a meet. They were in gymnastics and she had to leave. She couldn't go. And
Okay.
so I did find someone. And so she was kind of upset to me, or she mentioned to me that, although she was the CEO of
Mhm.
the company, her father owned the company. And it
Mhm.
was like, my father wants me to go. And she wasn't happy about it because
Okay.
she wasn't happy about it. So
Mhm.
I think she kind of publicly acknowledged it to me, but the feeling that disappointing her father if she didn't
Mhm.
go, and this she didn't push back. Okay.
Yeah.
And say, well,
Mhm.
my kids got to do this. I have to do
Mhm.
that. She went ahead and took the trip, but she wasn't happy about it. So I was thinking, would that could kind of be a little bit of her feeling imposter syndrome, because it was like, if I don't do it, I'm going to disappoint him.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Instead of
Yeah.
saying, I can't do it, or can you find somebody else, to go,
Mhm.
or can you go?
Yeah.
Because so, my daughters have
Mhm.
this real important, meet.
Mhm.
And so do you, that was just something, it was a different
Yeah.
angle on imposter syndrome, I
Yeah.
think.
Fear, disappointment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
yeah, disappointment. But I just thought of that when we were talking about, the self-confidence and having the resilience and
Mhm.
building it up over time.
Mhm.
So even, thinking about it, I didn't make, waves about it or anything. I just helped her find someone to watch the kids. But
Mhm.
it was interesting that she later um, decided to go on a sabbatical because
Mhm.
it had gotten to the point where I'm just going to have to step
Oh.
back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It just had built,
Mhm.
build up kind of thing.
It does. Yeah.
So let's talk about some famous people. Do you have any examples of famous or successful leaders who you feel have publicly acknowledged their struggles with imposter syndrome? Can you think of any?
Mm. Um, and I know, and it's going to seem like I'm a total fangirl to Michelle Obama because I am. But
That's quite all right. I get it.
I don't know if she called it that. I don't know if you remember her tour with Oprah in different cities to have conversations when she wrote her first book. And she talked about,
What was her first?
being
What was the
her.
first?
Oh,
God, I know I can see it. I have it. Um,
jeez, I'm so bad with titles. I just, just
but
but
I do remember
becoming,
it,
becoming, is it becoming Obama
becoming
or becoming?
becoming something, like maybe it was becoming.
Yeah.
It could have
Yes.
been
Mm-hmm.
becoming. Yeah. And she was
Yeah.
doing okay, she was doing the tour
She
with
was doing the tour. And I
okay.
don't know if she used the term imposter syndrome, and
Mm-hmm.
even, in recent tours, it's just like that vulnerability of
Mm-hmm.
like, it's like we forget that we are humans
Mm-hmm.
before anything else. You don't show up, you're not born a wife, you're not born an executive, you're not born a husband, you're not
Right.
born in these roles that we have. And there've been so many mechanical, robotical things that are attached to it, or requirements,
Mm-hmm.
right, that are attached to it that we've conformed to, that is very hard to break out of that shell and include the humanity in it. And I think that's one of the things I admire about her so much. Even when she was first lady, she did what she wanted to do, she did what she needed to do, and she did it in a way that was still, quote unquote, acceptable by society, but
Mm-hmm.
it was based on her passions, and she was unapologetic about that. And she's still very unapologetic about it. Even for her to make the at the DNC to make the joke, you better be careful, you might get one of those black jobs. I thought that was hilarious.
I know.
But it was real. She didn't go in there mechanical, like you need to
Right.
vote and all this stuff. It
Right.
was just like, let me keep it very
Be
real with
real
you.
with you. Right.
And I love that about her. And since following in the Obama from the beginning,
Uh-huh.
is seeing her. Yes, I like Barack Obama, but I love Michelle Obama.
Uh-huh.
And it just, when I think about how that impacted my career and how real she was, and
Mm-hmm.
things she didn't address when it was very insulting, she just didn't give it the time, she didn't give it the energy.
The energy,
I
yeah.
started I admired that, first of all, and took on some of that energy myself in my professional career, my personal career. Started to do things that I really wanted to do for myself, and not
Mm-hmm.
let things or people or perception
Mm-hmm.
hold me back, and being very assertive. I think I've been assertive throughout my career,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it increased more
Right.
as I grew in it, and still wanted to grow in every process. I still want to grow in my career, but just looking at things that help overall, and us getting back to imposter syndrome and celebrities. I think Michelle Obama talked about some of her insecurities, and the things that she experienced as a wife, as a mom, as the first lady,
Lady, yeah.
but the humanity that she would pull back in, and like, I'm me, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just me, but I'm just me,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm
Right.
going to navigate this life in a way that works for me and my family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, she did quite a bit, I think, for all women when it came to sharing her truth about
Mm-hmm.
that. And it just put a lot on your mind to think about, to
Mm-hmm.
reflect and think about that her realness is like saying to others, I'm just like you. And it's
Yeah.
saying because we all,
Yeah.
you're right, we go through the same struggles.
Mm-hmm.
We're human. We're gonna have the same emotions. We may not have the same experiences, but we still are going to experience things that are going to be very similar that we can relate to. And so
Yeah, and not to take yourself too seriously, too. I
seriously,
think that
yeah,
was her message. Don't take it so seriously that you feel like
yeah,
you're above anyone
right.
else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I like that part of it too, because
Mm-hmm.
you run into that a lot. I
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't say a lot, but you run into that, and then it's sort of like when I see that, it's like, okay, I see you, but I know better.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I know better. And I
Yeah.
think when you approach people from a place of, it's been my experience just the other day, I'm going to be working with some people, and I was kind of touching base with them before I come. And I could
Mm-hmm.
tell by the that conversation, they were anxious at first. I've heard good things, I've heard bad things. I don't know how this is going to work. Learning
Mm-hmm.
something new is always, can be somewhat of a time of, am I going to get it, not get it, how's it going to
Mm-hmm.
affect my job, all of that stuff that goes with it.
Yeah.
But I was able by the end of the call
Mm-hmm.
to be able for them to feel, okay, I know you're coming, and I feel comfortable that you're really going to help us through this. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And I don't have to have that, I could feel the tension and the anxiousness kind of going down by the end of the call. And so for me, that shows that let them know that when I come, you don't have to worry. I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to take care of you. Okay.
Got you.
Because I'm
Yeah.
going to be leading this
Yeah.
for you. But you don't have to worry. I'm going to make sure that
Mm-hmm.
everything's taken care of. I'm not going to leave
Mm-hmm.
you high and dry. And I could
Mm-hmm.
just hear from their voice, the tone of the voice that it's the sigh, the
I relief.
okay,
Yeah.
I can't wait for you to come, we'll look for you
Mm-hmm.
on Tuesday. I'm like, okay, I'll be there Tuesday. But,
Mm-hmm.
but because they were very kind of, everyone was kind of tense about what was going to happen because everything was going to be so brand new for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when you're right, people, even me thinking about now, I know what I have to do when I get there. But of
Yeah.
course, I'm thinking I've run into situations where it doesn't go like it's supposed to go.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And then you're like, oh my God, then that imposter syndrome comes and
Yeah.
it just is a flash in the pan kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing because they're looking to you, right? They're looking to me because I'm the one that's supposed to get them up and running or get
Yeah.
things, situated.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, but I'm going to figure this out for you. So we're going to figure this
Mm-hmm.
out. So my mantra is we're going to figure this out together. We're going to learn this together.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yes.
not,
Yes.
we're gonna get this done.
Yeah.
And so that for me, that calms me. You see
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying? That really calms me to say, okay, you can think this through and we're gonna think it through and then and then do whatever it is we have to do. So that's
Yeah.
a lot, that's kind of a personal story,
Mm-hmm.
how I use, myself
Mm-hmm.
when imposter syndrome kind of comes up or I feel
Yeah.
like it's trying to bubble up,
Mm-hmm.
because I never want to go in like I know it all. I know a
Right.
lot, but
Mm-hmm.
there are always going to be circumstances that can happen that I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to have to troubleshoot or figure out, and we're going to
Mm-hmm.
figure it out together. So both of us are going to learn at the same time.
Yeah, and having that plan is so important. That's what I
Mhm.
mentioned before. Once you figure out how it shows up, what's your plan
Right.
when it shows up? You understand the why. Now, what's the plan? Are you going to take a deep breath? Are you going to find out more? Are you going to emphasize the partnership? Because I've been there before too. It's like, look, I'm putting you at ease, but this is a partnership, and we're gonna figure it out.
Right.
We're gonna. I had an old manager that just said, make it happen, and it can be a lot of different things, right? It could be the desired outcome, or it could be a variation of that because something in these dynamics went left.
Right.
So we got to figure it out. Okay, and being honest and vulnerable. You know what? Didn't
Yeah.
anticipate this, but let's face it head on and
Hmm.
see. Okay, what do we need to know? How do we need to who
Yep.
else do we need to bring in to make sure that this is successful,
Hmm.
right? And just being clear on the process as you go. So, like I said, I experienced the same thing. It's more so fleeting, like, okay, can you do this? And my answer is yes. Where you have nerves, I do. But how can I move this energy to some place where it's going to support and serve me and whomever I'm working with?
Yeah.
So it doesn't hinder me or stifle me from doing what I know I need to do. And fear is a it's a beast
It is.
sometimes. It's
Yeah,
just
it can be.
that fear of that failure.
Hmm.
And one thing I would say about failure I learned throughout my career is like failure is not always bad. That's where we grow. We
Hmm.
don't go into anything saying, "Okay, I'm about to fail," you
Hmm.
know, and
Right.
grow. No, you go into it wanting to get to that desired outcome, but if it doesn't turn out exactly the way or not even close to that way,
Mhm.
okay, so I failed. This didn't work out. So
Mhm.
what can I learn from this?
Right.
How can I do it differently the next time? Who do I need to talk to that was part of this process that
Mhm.
has feedback for me about things that I wasn't privy to or I didn't perceive a certain way? And yes, it's one thing to feel it. Of course you're going to feel it. I'm not trying to minimize the
No.
feeling of failure,
Right.
but I would emphasize to use it to your advantage. Like what can you learn from this situation that will allow you to be more successful in the next situation. And
Mhm.
that's so important. And you got to step out on that
Mhm.
to see what happens because I mean, you just sit back and like, I could have done that. I didn't do that. And I don't even know what could have happened if
If
I
it
did.
did that, yeah.
Just fall into that regret instead of seeing what happens,
Mhm.
the curiosity of it all.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's true. Because when I go out, I get a different team every time.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's like, so I'm running into all different type of personalities I don't
Hmm.
know, and I got to
Yeah.
size that up real quick and build this team up real quick because we may
Yeah.
only have a couple of days together, and we got to get
Mm.
through some things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. We don't
and
have
so,
time for the nonsense. So let's do
right, we
it.
got to
Let's get
we
it.
got to get through some things, we got to make
Yeah.
it happen, and
Yeah.
I'm going to walk, like I said, I'm going to hold your hand the whole way and walk you through it. Make sure you're
Mhm.
comfortable, and
Yeah.
feel safe once,
Yeah.
we get through it. But from that perspective, it's not that I don't have time to have a doubt. It's
Hmm.
like I may have, I do have the time to have the doubt in the moment of maybe something bubbling up or happening to say,
Yes.
okay, this is going to, I'm going to have to shift.
Hmm.
I'm going to have to
Give it
shift.
a shift.
We're going to have to figure it out. It's okay to let them know this is what I think it is, or I don't know. And I'm going to
Hmm.
call somebody in or whatever I have to do to, to straighten out what I can't fix. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's like, yeah, I'm leading your team, but if I run
Yeah.
into something and I really can't figure it out or troubleshoot it myself, then I got to
Hmm.
call somebody else and, let me call somebody
Yeah.
else, text somebody else, see if they can help me out with this. And we'll get an answer for you, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's what I
Absolutely.
mean by, you know, um, having that imposter syndrome that can pop up just in an
Mm.
instance for just something that may
Yeah.
have happened in the moment. But
Yeah.
then saying that I got to get through this, we got to get through this, and then, going on with getting it done, basically. Um,
Yeah, I have a friend
uh,
who, and I would love to say her name, Ronnie Dickerson Stewart. She's just a brilliant person, and she's talked about the power of pivoting, which is a great tactic for imposter syndrome.
it's the
Like when
power
you do the power of pivoting,
of
when you
pivoting.
pivot,
Okay.
when you said shift, I thought pivot, and I
Okay.
thought, some things she talked about in that power in pivoting is that first of all, you can, because sometimes when we run up against something, it's just like, oh my gosh, the world is ending, it's done, it's over, it's completely failed,
Right.
as opposed to, oh gosh, we just hit a wall. Okay, we need to pivot.
Hmm.
And the power is in knowing that you can pivot,
Hmm.
right? And when you do pivot, it may be a little different, it may be a lot different, or you might even hit the target on the head. But if you stop,
Hmm.
you can't do anything, you can't
Tension.
achieve anything. So there's so much power
Hmm.
in the ability to pivot where you are and what you're doing. And when you have imposter syndrome and you have some of that fear there and it's not going the way you want to, and when that happens, our imposter syndrome starts to grow, even
Bro.
though we're past it. But if
Yes.
we know we can pivot, it decreases that because we have the ability to do it and have that plan towards something different and always being ready and willing, don't get
Yes.
ready, stay ready to pivot
Yes.
if you need to. Just like the example that you gave, you get to the point of like, oh crap, I don't know. Wait a minute, I didn't anticipate this.
Right.
But shifting and pivoting helps with that so much. And
Mhm.
in terms of using your knowledge and skills to do so.
The connection, what would you say is the connection when it comes to being the connection between self-awareness and overcoming self-doubt as a leader? I know I gave you an example, but what are your thoughts about the two together, the self-awareness and overcoming self-doubt?
It's
The
so
connection.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so important. It goes back to that what is happening with me right now
Mhm.
and being aware. So once you identify it, you can do something about it. But if you don't know what's happening, then spiral. continues, right?
Mhm.
So if you know you are prone to freaking out in a certain situation, if you know you are prone to turn left when things aren't going right, when you know you are more prone to do certain things, then you have the ability to do something with that information. You have the ability to combat it or to address it or to move through it
Mhm.
in order to continue on course to achieve what you want to achieve, accomplish what you want to accomplish, or influence where you need to influence. So that self-awareness is so important, and I think it's important for you to be self-aware of your strengths, because sometimes our strengths can get us out of situations that our development opportunities get us in,
Mhm.
right? So, and I usually call development opportunities instead of weaknesses. It's not weakness because you haven't built the strength.
Right.
So there's those are more so development opportunities, and sometimes our strengths can do that. And if we are aware of our strengths and what can help, is so important. Are you're familiar with Strength Finders, Clifton
Yeah.
Strengths?
Mhm.
And they focus on strengths,
Mhm.
but they also acknowledge that you have your balcony strength and your basement strength, right?
Mhm.
It could be one strength that in communication, right? That could be my strong point. I connect with people. I'm clear on what I communicate, and that's the balcony. But the basement is I'm over communicating and it's getting on people's nerves. So I'm communicating all the time, or I'm
Right.
communicating about stuff I don't need to communicate
Right.
about, right? So you're acknowledging that there's a balcony in the basement of every
Uh-huh.
strain, but that awareness allows you to navigate things a lot better. Whereas if you weren't aware of that basement communication part of your strength, then you could be unaware of how people are receiving the information, no matter how clear, no matter how effective. You could be unaware of that. So if you are self-aware and you have imposter syndrome, you can start to identify things that you can address that will allow you to move forward and shift that energy to something that's going to push you forward instead of holding you back.
Mhm. Okay. Um, let's, this is a little bit about, this is a question around, well, I'll just ask the question. Let's talk a little bit about this.
Mhm.
When it comes to imposter syndrome, do you feel it disappropriately affect women and minorities in leadership?
Mm. Mhm. Yes.
How, well, but then
I mean,
my
yeah.
second question
Okay.
would be, how so?
uh, it goes back to I think every individual experiences imposter syndrome differently. We talked about definitions at the beginning, whether it's our own or dictionary
Mhm.
definitions. I think it impacts people differently. And when it comes to people of color and women specifically, we talked about that box you have to, or the traits you have to have in order to be a leader societally, and what's expected in that sense. And anytime you don't line up with that, people look at you differently.
Mhm.
And then you have the dynamics of sexism, racism, all those things that are still part of corporate structures.
Mhm.
And when you go into that space, you have to know, or where you're conditioned to know, that you are different.
Okay.
And it shows up in how people treat you, and the expectations you have of being in that environment.
Mhm.
So, of course, when I'm bumping up against these things that I think are required and that will show my compliance to this space,
Mhm.
and I'm constantly analyzing, am I showing up that way? But I'm conflicted too, because is it authentic to who I am
Right.
as well? So not only am I dealing with the imposter syndrome of being worried about showing up a certain way and being perceived a way, and whether or not I can really do this in this space, I'm also dealing with, the other things that may make people perceive me a certain way, stereotypically as a Black person, as a woman, as anything I show up as that I'm talking about or they can see. So do I think it impacts us more, or my people of color and women more? Not necessarily, because a white man could have some imposter syndrome issues based on their past experiences, based on triggers that have been part of their existence in corporate, but in different ways. And then it'll show up on a Black woman
Mhm,
in a different way than a white woman,
mhm.
would experience it. And not just because they're Black and white and women, but because of the experiences they've had as part of their corporate existence in their corporate life.
Are there any other unique challenges that underrepresented leaders face in
Mm.
combating imposter syndrome?
Yeah, sometimes it's just perceived and sometimes it's covert, sometimes it's overt, but
Mhm.
the fact that I say the fact that the perception that we're coming in and we can't do the job,
Okay.
right? If that's the perception coming in, and we've often talked about in the program that I referenced earlier, is like their mothers and grandmothers and fathers and grandfathers, like you have to come in and do 10 times better
Mhm.
than the other person in order to be recognized or awarded or rewarded for what you do in the job. That's a lot of pressure, first of all, coming
Right.
into it, because that's the speech I got a couple times after I graduated with my master's. I'm going in corporate. Do what? Work 10 times? But I mean, I felt like that in college too, because
Yeah.
I experienced things where professors would celebrate someone for getting straight A's and I got two A's, or I had all B's and they had the same celebration. I was like, that's all they expect of me?
Hmm.
How come they're not giving me ways to get all A's
Hey.
instead of celebrating all my B's? Right. But then get into the corporate world and it was like you got to work 10 times harder. And then I started to feel that when I would work hard, I would see what was required at the next level and then start working at that level, and I'm like, nobody said anything, so let me say something. And when
Hmm.
I say something, it being minimized,
Hmm.
or it was like, okay, just do one more thing and you'll get there. And okay,
Hmm.
what's that one more thing? And then it's something
I hate it. Yeah.
silly.
Yeah.
It's just very silly. And then it's like, okay, then now what? Now what? And not till I threaten to leave, do you want to keep me here and elevate me? Nah, I think I'm gonna leave. Because the recognition of what I contributed is not there. And no, no one has ever told me in the professional environment, I'm not promoting you because you're Black. Nobody has ever told
They
me
can
that,
never say that.
but it's felt that way
I know. But
multiple times,
well,
especially when you see
that's,
your colleagues
that's
that don't look like you
I know, but
being promoted.
listen, that's a
You have
lawsuit
to
that
say
can
it.
happen. We always, you know what?
Right, right. They're
You
not going to
can't,
do that.
right. But there
But
will be
it's
a
like
reason. There will be a
there
reason
will be
to
a reason. And
disenfranchise you. Yes.
yeah, and I pushed and I made it a point to push, okay, so what else? What else? What are the expectations? Okay, yeah. Do you think I met or exceeded the expectation? Exceeded. Okay, so
Hmm.
what's next? And
Hmm.
I often, not often, but sometimes I tell the story is I think if I count correctly, I've had 8 promotions in my career, and
Hmm.
I've had to ask for and fight for five or six of those promotions in my career. And it wasn't because I didn't do the work. My mom and dad set a standard of excellence when I
Hmm.
grew up, and
Hmm.
whether you love it or hate it, failure was not an option
I know.
for me. Even though, I did fail in some things, but they supported me to push me back up to move forward. It wasn't a pressure thing in the sense of this is what you have to do, but a mindset of if you do keep moving forward, if you just keep moving forward, and excellence is your standard, not not standard or substandard.
Mhm.
So when I moved through my career, I made it a point to demonstrate that, and I didn't see it happening for me the way it was happening for other people.
Mhm.
So that's where we understand it to be us.
Yes.
And instead of that, especially when I get compliments like you're so articulate and well groomed, and I've gotten them more than once, as opposed to my ability and experience to do the job.
That you know what that line articulate and smart, it can be a double-edged sword.
It can.
It
Hmm.
it can be an ep from the fact that I'm afraid of you because you are, or I'm afraid
Mm.
because of
Mm.
because you are,
Hmm.
and or from the fact that you can't, um, so I'm going to try, that's a threat to me, so I'm going to try and hold you back. Or
Hmm.
it can also be, um, you are, what is it? The Capricorn. You're the exception.
Okay.
You're the
Hmm.
exception
Hmm. Yes, I'm
to that.
impressed. I'm
I'm
impressed
I'm impressed with that.
because you all don't usually do that. That's what it feels like, right? To understand and this is put out there not to beat up or not to say that everyone does it, but that's how it's seen because that's where the whole microaggression, that's where the unconscious bias comes from. People saying things like that, and it's not to beat up someone who says you're so articulate and well groomed. This is like, but do you know why you're saying that,
Mhm.
and why you didn't over index in my ability
Mhm.
and my contribution and not my appearance and my addiction.
Right. You
And
did.
and then I listen for, are you telling people that don't look like me that they're articulate and well groomed? And when you're not, it's that's how you come full circle to like maybe it's because
Uh-huh. Right. I get it. So,
yeah.
Nicole, let me ask you then, how has your journey, okay,
Mm. Hmm.
through imposter syndrome that you may have experienced shaped the way that you lead today?
Oh, I am. I would like to say that I demonstrate the compassionate leader part of these things, being compassionate, looking at the whole person, not just them as a professional, not just someone that's on my team or someone I'm supporting through coaching or whatever. It's more so first and foremost, you are a human being that needs certain things,
Mhm.
and you need to feel safe. You need to feel like you're heard. You need to feel like you're valued
Mhm.
in this space because you are by me specifically. The
Mhm.
space may not, your manager or whomever may not, but I consider it a privilege to connect with people.
Mhm.
It's like that's where I thrive. I want to connect. I want to talk. I want to support. I want to serve. I learn from that and hope that I can contribute something that they can learn from me. So when that imposter syndrome comes up and I talk to people, like, first of all, I've experienced it too.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't know so much about myself and have so much self-awareness if I hadn't pushed through that fear and
Mhm.
pushed through the imposter syndrome. So my encouragement is to do so, and what would you do if you weren't afraid? What
Mhm.
would you do if imposter syndrome wasn't a thing?
Mhm.
And having those conversations, building those relationships that will allow me to create a safe space
Okay.
for them and demonstrating that in a way, hoping that they can do that for other people that they work with or lead.
Okay. And my last question is, what would you tell your younger self or anyone else entering leadership
Mhm.
today about overcoming imposter syndrome? What would you tell your younger self?
Ooh, um, that I would lean more into just being who you are. Understand the constructs you're entering, right? In order to to deliver on what it is that you've been hired to do,
Mhm.
but don't take on all the pressure of what you're supposed to be.
Mhm.
Create or recreate or influence the culture around you to the point where who you are is going to bring something positive and wonderful to the space that you are in. Don't comply so fast.
Mhm.
Don't worry about the stereotypes. And like I think I shared with you, like so many young Black women are talking about, I don't want to come in as an angry Black woman.
Mhm.
But if you're passionate about something and you have something to share and you're still being professional, no matter what you do, you can be perceived that way.
Mhm.
So if you worry about those things, it starts to take energy and movement away from you.
Mhm.
So go in, be who you are, stand up for yourself, and be compassionate to yourself, give yourself grace,
Mhm.
but also have know your value so that nobody can try to take it away from you.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I would share with
Yeah,
my younger self.
thank you, Nicole. This has been wonderful.